Heyo, welcome to the Industry Idiots podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy this episode. Bye.
Hello, guys. New episode of the Industry Idiots.
Our intro is so short now. What's up, Sven?
Feels bare bones a little bit, but it's still cheery and jiggly and hype as our podcast as well. Always.
Easy peasy. All right, let's hear how the usual recap. How have you been?
I'm pretty good. Felt very busy again the last week. Had a lot of stuff to do, a lot of stuff to take care on, but also managed to play a lot. Of course, entirely for science reasons. As always. How have you been?
Doing fine. I crunched one more hand in a painting, and other than that, all good. I'm working on a new project outside of uni, but I can't say a lot about it right now. But it's a tool for pen and papers. Let's see if that comes to fruition. But other than that,
I was just
everything as normal.
Asking about it. Yeah. If it's what it's gonna be, but if you can't share anything, that's a disaster. I'm now very intrigued after this teaser.
This little teaser.
Yeah.
No, you and me, we have news. Sven and me have started playing pen and paper together. That's something, I guess, outside of work.
That's a first, actually. Or is it? No, we have played in Munich in person.
Have we played in Munich?
Some one-shots maybe, but not like a longer campaign, not something that we do every 2 weeks and try to keep running for maybe a year or even longer if it's bearable after that time to spend so much time with you.
Yeah, if the last 10 years didn't tell you enough, then I've got bad news for you. We will see.
It's actually pretty interesting, the system we decided to pick up and we decided to start. It's not the conventional D&D or Pathfinder. It's actually one that originated from Germany, as far as I know.
The Dark Eye.
Yeah.
It's pretty sick.
And it's super complex in terms of its systems and much less streamlined than D&D, I feel.
But it's easier to understand, not because of the language barrier, but because the rules actually make sense, you know? Like I've been playing in Dungeon Mastering D&D for a little over 10 years, and DSA or the Dark Eye is really a godsend in that regard, because it promotes roleplay versus D&D's number crunching combat and that kind of stuff. So I prefer DSA over D&D.
And it's also much more precise in terms of, like, it doesn't leave too much room open for interpretation in their rule system, I'd say. I think D&D is, for the role-playing aspect, more loose, but for the combat, more precise. And here in DSA, the role-playing is more precise and the combat is a bit looser in comparison.
You also exist in a very, very detailed, already existing world in DSR. Yeah, I know D&D has books as well, and the world also somehow exists as well, but it's not as set in stone as with the Dark Eye.
That's true. Aventurien.
Yeah,
is it the same name in English?
Probably. Aventuria, maybe. Well, it's a world that has over 100 novels. Like, there's wikis with which mage is living where and where their relatives and what's their guilds and what is the guild. It's crazy. It's really crazy. It's like a historical documentation of that you would find if you go to your local library.
Yeah. And as preparation for starting our campaign, I also watched a bunch of YouTube videos and already noticed that is a complete new rabbit hole you can get yourself lost in.
For sure.
Because there's so much lore. Like, you can't even take in. But I guess it's not expected you from when you start a new system that you outright know everything about the world. So
it's nice for it to be just us again. Like we had so many guest episodes, like back to back, right? We had Max coming in from Cyberpunk, from CDPR, and then we had Mitya coming in from Machine Games in Wolfenstein.
It's only us now.
You're stuck with us, guys. But we have more coming in the future. Some New Zealandish goodies are coming in and will enrich us with their wonderful accent in the future, but we're not going to say whom yet.
These will be probably in the next episode or after it.
Yeah, for sure. But it's nice to just chill between us again for a change of pace.
Indeed. Change of pace. It's a similar feeling to when we play our pen and paper games. Is also, I think, if you play with your close friends, it's becoming much more intimate and much more personal, and you also act differently as a person akin to or compared to when you play pen and paper systems or role playing or tabletop with people you didn't meet before or met before. Because I definitely see myself being able to go for more weirder, more unusual stuff with a context where I'm familiar with the people I'm familiar with. It's not really related to the systems, but to the people you're playing with. And it's always interesting to see how different you act with the context of the people you're playing with. I guess it's translates the same to multiplayer games online as well. So,
and also what kind of characters you like building, right? I mean, some people like me, they enjoy building characters that are close or true to one's own personality, oftentimes. Then there's people who like to power fantasy their own personality, so they take themselves and amplify every trait times 10. And then there's people who, who are a normal run-of-the-mill dude, and they like to play a female alien with 10 tentacles in their sci-fi pen and paper. So there's all the crazy things are possible, and it just entirely depends on what kind of characters you like to bring into that fictional world.
The cool thing about it, I think, is that like all of the community is super inclusive and completely welcoming and respectful, regardless of which type of fantasy you're going for. You will always find a place in the group. You can always contribute in some form to the game and to the play experience. So that's super cool.
As long as you respect the world, right? I mean, don't bring a sci-fi alien into a classical medieval setting. True. That's maybe not the case. But in terms of inclusiveness and progressiveness, and like, the roleplay community is very, very forward and very, like as you said, inclusive.
I'd say respect the rules.
No one being discriminated.
And also the players, yeah. No one being discriminated is a good point, for sure.
But I do feel like that should be the standard. It should not be a special feature to be requested.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Every gender and, I don't know, sexuality. And actually, I don't even think that matters. I guess I'm somewhat of a neutralist or brutalist in that regard. Like, I don't even want to know. Like, I don't give a fuck. Just be your character. And if your character is pansexual, then your character is pansexual. I don't care who the player is behind that character, and to be honest. So just be yourself, just have fun, just do whatever you want, and be respectful while doing that, of course.
Yeah, just be yourself. And the beauty is you don't also have to be yourself, because you can be somebody else. That's the cool thing.
That's true.
Have you tried or have you played a character before that goes completely against who you are as a person, trying to switch everything on the head, being like, maybe let's say some weird little gnome who is always trying to play some kind of let's say I don't know, tries to sing songs all the time, because I've never seen playing you a bard or something, or some other role, and then enforcing the character traits you know of that character.
It's definitely a fun writing exercise and maybe acting exercise, but I don't enjoy being a character that is not leaned towards my personality. I change traits heavily because in real life, as you know, I don't drink alcohol at all, only drink water and tea. And the last campaign I played an alcoholic druid dwarf who could only use stone hammers. So he was like a low-key fighter, even though druids are usually not fighters. But with his stone weaponry, he was basically a druid fighter. And he was very, very alcoholic and abrasive and naked in everyone's face and that kind of stuff. And not in a sexual harassment kind of way, but in a, weird nature hippie way. And that's definitely not who I am in real life. So that was probably a little bit against me. But he still had the same, like the traits I enjoy having, my characters that I enjoy my characters having, And I pick a couple personality traits that go against mine every time, but I don't, like, they always have to be cool and interesting and cool characters. I don't want to play someone who's bland, for example. I would never play a boring person. Like, I could not do this. And yes, interesting challenge to maybe play a person who's not Like I'm very quirky and or humorous, I would say, in these kind of situations, but I couldn't play someone who's super like collected and boring and just nah. How about you?
Well, most of the time I try to play something that's not me, as try to getting a new perspective and not like an extension of myself, not like a representation of myself, and more like trying to just explore gameplay possibilities and acting as something that's not me. For example, I've played a Paladin Dragonborn in one campaign, and he was this kind of chaotic character who'd try to fulfill on his quest of revenge while also being a paladin. And like after the second campaign, he fell into the darkness basically. And as most people probably know me, I'm most of the time very cheerful and very positive to most people. So that's something that character was always completely going against that and was always trying to look at everything with a negative outlook in life and being very pessimistic. Yeah. And I'm not the type of guy who is super pessimistic. I'm probably the most optimistic guy. Yeah, that's like I try to explore stuff that isn't so close to my daily self. So I guess it's a form of escapism, but not intentional escapism, just curiosity of seeing something different.
Okay, I see the point of the escapism, but I wouldn't say that like don't make an unenjoyable characters for the others. I don't want to play with a negative Nelly who is just constantly downing all the cool ideas. I wouldn't want to hang out with someone like that in real life, and I don't want to hang out with someone like that in a fictional adventure setting.
That's a fair point.
Don't make terrible characters. Like I don't want to. If you bring a sexist character to my table, or a racist, or a downer who is like constantly pessimistic, then you can find another table. Not saying this to you specifically, Sven, but to like generally as a dungeon master speaking. Should be an enjoyable experience for everyone. If you build your character to be unenjoyable or like even negatively affecting everyone else's fun, then no.
Well, you have to, of course, strike a balance and build that character for a specific purpose. You don't build the character to be a dick to your fellow party members, of course. You have to balance that out.
Oh, I've had those. I've had many of those. Like the rogues that steal from their party can be fun, can be cool. But if you know, most of the time it's not.
Yeah, most of the time it's unenjoyable.
Yeah, it's just giving, like, if you're out with your friends in real life, you don't steal their fucking wallet. It's not what you do.
Maybe that's the temptation because you wouldn't do it in real life and that's a safe space, basically.
A safe space to be an asshole.
Yeah, that's a shitty excuse. That's how it sounds, yeah. I wouldn't enjoy that as well.
But there's also these many things that you cannot do in real life that you can do there, which are amazing. You know, you can bamboozle. There's always a fine line between bamboozling and being just a straight up dick. You can do the craziest cool bamboozle stuff with your illusion mage or with your rogue as well, but just don't overdo it versus your party. Just try to bamboozle other NPCs in the world together with your party, or bamboozle a DM. This is the most fun. If people try to outsmart me while I run a campaign, that's the best part.
That must always be interesting for a DM when you can't see that coming and you have this person who acts like whatever for 20 sessions, and then in the 21st session there comes the big reveal or a big twist. I just acted this way because this and that. And then all the party members are also like, what? No, I didn't see that coming. If you happen to have that would honestly be amazing.
Yeah, and the other way around as well. I enjoy like bamboozling my party when I'm a DM. Not in terms of like there's a trap that insta gives you if you walk in, you die. And that's not a bamboozle.
Very enjoyable.
But introducing some narratives that I work on in my daily life and my work life into like more of the complex ones, like twisty ones where you encounter something and all of the party members are whispered something, and then I play them against each other without playing them against each other, like telling them that one of them is possessed and there's a voice speaking to all of you, and then I give each and every one of them a little piece of paper, and the piece of paper reads that this voice is whispering to you that you're the one being possessed. And so, but if you're found out you're being, I don't know, killed or robbed of or stripped naked or something, not killed, it's a bit harsh maybe, but or they lose their left hand or 3 fingers or whatever. So they don't want to be found out.
Quite drastic.
The thing is that the twist is that they all think that they are being the possessed ones, and they all don't want to be found out. So they play against each other all the time. But in the end, it was maybe just some form of trickster god messing with them and that kind of stuff. So I like having believable twists where the party in the end goes, what? So
that sounds very enjoyable. I always wondered, as you are very deep into the narrative design realm, if you're ever, like when you think of ideas you have, that if you are prototyping those in your D&D campaigns, that if you think of a cool short story and you try to incorporate that into your like main campaign, if you run a longer campaign, or if you would keep your long running campaign, if you would keep that like what you planned from the beginning, or if you think that is a space where you can do that, what would your thoughts be?
I completely missed the question. The question was so long. Can you, like, one sentence?
The question is okay, let's say it this way: you start a campaign and set up for a longer campaign and plan everything from the beginning, and then you have a cool idea in your daily life which you want to try out as just like a narrative short story. If you keep the long running campaign, if you keep the short story out of there, or if you see this also as a vehicle to test that story with 4 players and see where it might also take you where you haven't thought of.
No, I always build and design my quests or my encounters or these stories that come to me as blocks that I can dynamically put anywhere. So they don't know, but if I have a great idea for like a narrative demonic twist with some occult whatever faction or whatever, then I write it down in my Dungeon Master handbook, and it's there. It's constructed. It has all the characters. It has all the twists. It has all the artifacts. It has all the cool things, and some monster or whatever is being encountered with dynamic level scaling. And then whenever I feel like it, or whenever the players naturally encounter something like that, I can just throw that in. So I try to build my world, like I have a world with its own pantheon, with its own gods. I like to build it modular, in a modular fashion, so I can always swap out pieces and, as you said, check how things work and how things can work and prototype those narratives, I guess. But cool question.
Reference those blocks and kind of like playing Lego with a story.
Yeah,
you have your huge chunk of ideas, and you pick the red brick, and the red brick is the necromancer story, and you put it on top of the blue brick, which was some kind of dungeon you did before. So
there's some things you always need to provide, right? You need to provide motivation that comes from, like, you have to provide the motivation, but you can't force your party to do your adventure, because I think that's boring. If you're a DM and you streamline your party through you don't allow them to deviate. Yes, you can put them in a dungeon and that's sealed with magic and whatever, and they can't get out and they have to find a way out. Cool, do that. That's not a problem. But if you have this one narrative that you want to push, but your players decide to go fishing for 6 hours, or let's say 3 hours, the dungeon master shouldn't be bored. And then you shouldn't force them to still go through that narrative, that you have this one narrative that you have constructed for that you want them to play. Like if they just find something dynamically, if they want to spend their time fishing, you can come up with an NPC that goes to them and distracts them, or you can have they fish up a magical artifact and they use, has some cool powers, and it transports them into a new narrative, or all the things. You can do all the things. You just need to be creative as a dungeon master. And if you're starting, I don't want to hate on anyone. If you're starting out and you have a pre-con, right, you buy a book where it has a one-set campaign and you want to play this with your players, do it. Communicate with your players though. But I'm speaking about seasoned dungeon masters. You should always allow your players the freedom to roleplay, because this is what it's about. You as a dungeon master want to have fun being creative and messing a little bit with your players while giving them the playground to enjoy themselves. But on the other hand, you need to provide them the playground where they can enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I fully agree.
And if you're honest, like dungeon mastering, the players play one character. You as a dungeon master, you play 1,000 characters. It's way cooler. Bringing obstrude, crazy characters into your world, it's the best thing.
And act that out, yeah. Do you think it's more enjoyable for players to have something that is like a modular narrative, or like you mentioned, there are of course these one-off books who are done, or sessions within 2 campaigns or something. But if you have a carefully constructed, like, let's say, arc with Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, do you think that's more enjoyable than having something that's purely emergent without no structure at all?
That's the thing. These story bricks that I provide, the players do not know that they are being provided story bricks. For them, it feels like they're going through an arc. But this is from 10 years of experience dungeon mastering. This should be the goal. You should be able to, on the fly, craft narrative arcs that feel authentic and like they are written to be experienced in that particular way without them actually being that way. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as these pieces that you're creating, it's not unlike quest design for video games. The player, if we just think about any Witcher quest, right? You have this notice board, and this notice board tells you there is crop going missing and sheep are being slaughtered, all right? And then that's it. That's all you got. So you start somehow. You can approach this in multiple ways. You can go ask the farmers. You can just go wherever you think this happened and investigate yourself with your Witcher senses. Or like all of these different approaches you can use. And if let's just say the player chooses to go with ask the villagers, and then the villagers tell you where they think this is coming from. Maybe they reveal the lair to you. You go to the lair, then you confront the evil entity in there. Maybe there's a twist and this evil entity isn't evil, whatever, doesn't matter. And then you go through that, and then you kill them or free them of this, whatever, and then you're out. And for the player, this feels like this was a constructed narrative arc that was to be experienced in this exact way. But in reality, you just encountered one of the different story blocks that you could have encountered to proceed to further the narrative along. You could have gone the other way, where you just go exploring and you find clues, and the clues lead you to this lair, and then you immediately kill him without ever talking to the evil entity. But the players will never know, because they only experience one side of the narrative. And this is how I feel like you should construct your dungeon master story bricks for the players to discover.
Yeah, that's kind of a break from like, I always love if like something is carefully paced and constructed when you're consuming a narrative. But if you're partaking in anything, then of course it becomes much harder for any DM or quest designer to pace things correctly and pace things, or even pace things. I don't know if you. I guess it's much more on a micro level, the pacing you do as a dungeon master compared to how it's in the context of a game, because you can much more easily improvise as well and twitch your narrative blocks, what like read the feeling in the room. And as a game, you can't really feel the mood of the player, what he wants to do next. Like, is he more in the mood of having like a more explorative quest? Is he more in the mood of having combat now? You can't read that. And as a dungeon master, you can, of course, kind of get the feeling from the players of your room, how they interact with you, how they react for something, if they're giving you something to play with. And that's like one big difference in designing for either DMing or designing for games, even though they're super similar in the grand scheme of things.
There's something making the rounds currently on Twitter, a big discussion that was started by someone, I don't know whom. I saw it when Jeff Garnier reacted to it, because he worked on open world games for most of his career, and the original post said that open world games need to stop getting more massive, and instead they need to become more transformative. So whatever you encounter and whatever you do in this world as a player will have consequences on the environment. Might it be narrative chunks, or might it be, Jeff brought the example of draining a river, and through draining the river as the player, the crops die and maybe the villages die out and quests go missing and this kind of stuff. So I think it's just a question of how you as a designer want your narrative to be experienced, because we know that immersion is the number one thing. You can achieve immersion with responsive narrative, as I wrote in my blog, but you can also achieve immersion without a responsive narrative. Look at games like The Witcher, look at games like, maybe Witcher is a little bit responsive, but look at games like Dark Souls. There's no forced narrative, the world never changes. Like, you can unlock new areas in a Metroidvania style approach, but there's no interacting with the environment in a sandboxy way.
And even the same enemies come back when you respawn.
Exactly. And yet it is one of the best open world games that was ever made, and one of the most beloved. So clearly, both ways are viable and valid. You just have to find out which one works better for you and your players. What kind of experience you want to craft.
There's actually one game from 2002 which we both loved and played, and that's Gothic 2. And Gothic 2 did this phenomenally, I think, like the dynamic change of the island, because the way you progress to the game. Okay, let's give a little bit of context. The game from back in the day had like 5 chapters spread out over like this prison island, and in the beginning there was less magical stuff involved, and the more you uncovered the magical side of the story with the dragons and with the gods and stuff, then suddenly there were people starting to roam this island and waiting you at certain spots where you have already been, and you were backtracking, and then there's an ambush now which you haven't encountered in your first way through. And there were like a ton of those elements, and that made the world really lived in, because like NPCs, where they were, where they lived, where they moved, sometimes changed. Even like villagers in the city switched the houses in a certain. They were in one house in Act 1 and were in a different house in Act 3 because they had some narrative reason to be there. And these even those smaller things, you don't have to switch around much buildings or turn a world from normal to post-apocalyptic. Don't have to be such a drastic change. But even those smaller elements, when NPCs are not where you expect them to be, even that makes the world feel so more alive.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is responsive narrative, what you're talking about. This is exactly what it is. If the world, either through narrative or through environment changes or through anything, reacts to you as a player. When I was like discussing pirate games the other day, we were thinking about how can pirate things affect the world, right? If you are someone who behaves like he's slaughtering entire crews and I don't know, outposts or ports or whatever, and then you gain a certain reputation. And if you're like the scourge of the seven seas or something, and you encounter a faction that has heard of you and your ship, and you should be treated differently. And this is, I think, what is missing in many of the in the narratives. If you play Metal Gear Solid, or if you play The Witcher or Metal Gear Solid preferably, and you don't kill any single person, the game still treats you as you like this big villain, right? But we need the game to be like giving you dynamic titles for what you do that aren't pre-constructed. For example, you're this pirate legend, whatever, and you go out and you choose to save a maiden, and there's 20 people there to witness your good deed, right? And you do this with some kind of heroic, magical, whatever you can do. And then from what you did, we need to procedurally generate somehow a title that fits that is unique to this very thing that you did, that had no preemptive like input from the narrative designer. You solved this, like you slaughtered the entire village to save this girl, and then you get it's like Daenerys' titles from Game of Thrones, Breaker of Chains and Freer of Slaves and whatever, all of these kind of things. And then people referring to you as that title that you have earned through your emergent gameplay that no one else could have predicted, no one could have written for you, then that will make the player feel more immersed in the world, I feel like. And if we use 100 of these systems, then you have a living and immersive open world.
Oh yeah, I can for sure imagine that if you take Skyrim as an example, if you slay everyone in Whiterun and then get to Solitude, and then the first guard says, "Oh, beware, the Slayer of Whiterun," and then you haven't seen that coming because the system in place is
exactly
like deciding that this is gonna happen. This would be such a mind-blowing thing because you wouldn't expect it as a player.
That's exactly what I mean. And now we use this system and 100 other systems, and suddenly, and this is how I want to use procedural generation as a narrative designer, because people are afraid that procedural generation will take meaningfulness out of games. Like with No Man's Sky, where you have a billion planets, but none of them feel like they have character or meaning, because there's so many that they've all been generated, and you don't feel like someone put intent there. But with this system, you would only use the procedural narrative, the procedural generation, how the narrative interacts and cross-sects where it overlaps with the gameplay, with the emergent elements. And still the overarching narratives, the quests, the big plot, everything is still designed and written by people, by humans who have a specific intent with their message.
That would be the ultimate fantasy, honestly. Just imagining if you play something like Knights of the Old Republic, and you are joining the dark side, and then like literally everyone knows you're that Sith Lord and doesn't react like you're just a ordinary guy, even though the last corner, like 100 meters down the street, you just murdered a bunch of people, and they react to, "Hey, good day, sir, let's trade."
Yeah.
So that's like
maybe they even see you. Like,
okay, that's kind of a disconnection there.
It's an eye shot, and or do you say ear shot? I don't know if it's eye shot. It's in visible range, and they're just standing there like whistling, and you slaughter 100 people, and you have everyone screaming for their lives in the village, and you come out all bloody, and you go to this trader. Yeah, I'd love your finest chickens. Also, please buy these 243 swords that I have on me for some reason that look like the swords exactly from that village 10 meters away.
Which you sold me 2 hours of gameplay ago, but I completely forgot that you sold them to me. And that would also be something very like super responsive if you have like these interactions you have with traders and they remember what you sold them, and then they give you certain discounts on things they expect you to try to sell them again, like these little things, even though it feels a little bit pointless, but I don't know. I love those details. If like the smaller things also add to it.
But you, as a big lover of cinematography and composing awesome shots and environments, are you worried that the players, the more sandboxy the systems and the more they can have an actual effect on the world, burning down a village or whatever, are going to ruin your work at some point, and then the game will look ugly and they will be like, everything looks so bad, like when a battlefield map is completely flat, everything was destroyed?
Well, that's a good question. Normally you would think then when you're constructing like open spaces that are dynamically changeable, that they are, of course, no matter from which direction you compose or look at the points of interest, the composition is always good. For a lot of linear games that put you through funnels, if you turn around and look where you came from, the lighting is most of the time completely off. It doesn't look spectacular at all. Best example would be the scene in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 single player campaign where you retake is it the Capitol or the White House? One of those two in America, and you come out of these catacombs, and then there's the flares everywhere. The jets like flying through sky, explosions, and there are enemies, and the White House is completely enlightened with all the lights and spotlights and stuff. And then you turn around, and there's nothing behind you because most player won't in that situation look in that direction. There's nothing, like there's complete emptiness and no special lighting, no NPCs, and then the illusion completely breaks. But if you have an open world, of course, where you have to account for the player approaching from any direction, then it becomes much more difficult to make a careful composition. And in that sense, it also becomes less cinematic and less designed in a sense, in that cinematicness. But I think it can, of course, still be, in a way, be cinematic.
That's true. I mean, I don't know enough about cinematicness to contribute a whole lot there, but
yeah, the thing you have to most of the time encounter for the cinematicness are, of course, like classical techniques you know from photography, you know from architecture, you know from camera work as cinematography in film, rule of thirds, golden ratio, and stuff like that. And
just name dropping here for design terms.
Framing.
White weenies.
Show off.
Guiding lines.
Or a little dab in there.
If this would be a video, all of these like words would just pop up on the screen and people would faint everywhere because it's so insightful.
Like these meme compilations. Yeah, but for sure, like the camera work is, I think, the most important aspect if you want to tell a cinematic story. But it sounds painfully obvious, the sentence and the statement, but it's the truth. Like how to frame stuff is how you manage to put emphasis and the focus on and what the players look at and what is in the focus of the narrative. If you look, like let's say you have a cutscene and you cut away to something completely unrelated while the scene is still playing out, the dialogue is still playing out, then the dialogue becomes kind of meaningless because you're looking at something else.
Yeah.
And the same is for buildings and gameplay elements you want to keep in the shot and in the framing. You want to keep, like, let's say your ultimate mission goal in the center, and like in a funnel you are kind of working your way towards. And there are a lot of similarities between camera work and presenting stuff in film and presenting stuff in games.
Yeah, I want to argue a little bit against that because I want I hate the comparison between films and games, and I also am a big opponent of the opinion that games should be more like films. They should be somewhat cinematic, yes, but if I encounter an open world space and it's completely fucking perfectly cinematographically arranged, and I can already tell the perfect golden path through it, or the main path, as some like to say, through this, and I'm just uninterested. I want to find things on my own. I want to get lost sometimes in an open world game. If we talk about something like maybe Last of Us 1 or these kind of games, of course, they need to be guided. And you need to bamboozle people with what a combat space will be and won't be and all this kind of stuff. But in an open world, I want it to feel like an open world, not like a super overly linear designed experience. Don't make areas that aren't supposed to be looked at by the player so unattractive that the player will never have the intent to go exploring, right?
That's a big phenomenon of a lot of open world games, that you have a lot of these mini hubs of points of interest, that these points of interest become hubs themselves, and everything in between those points of interest, there's just nothing.
Exactly.
It's kind of real in a sense, because in reality, most of the time, there's not much stuff to do between objects. If you're going through a forest, there's maybe 1 point of interest, but in a game, of course, in that forest, there has to be 3 or 4 at least. And that's also a way how to keep your player going through the open world in a intended way, let's say it that way.
Yeah, and in a playful way. The player needs to be able to, as we've stated earlier with the narratives, be able to interact with the world and not just, pass through. Environmental storytelling is one of my favorite things in the world, as you know, but it's not enough. You can't just, pass by a tent where the inhabitants, like there's corpses there and you see some kind of magical book, and this arrangement of things tells you a story, yes, of what happened here. And it's cool to find, but it shouldn't be the only thing that is like placed in these in-between spaces. There should also be interactable things, which is often the case. If you look at Witcher and you are on your way to your Novigrad main quest and you pass this tower and you enter the tower and then you're suddenly in a mage tower that transports you back in time and there's a golem and all of these things and it's crazy shit happening everywhere. And this is how it should be. I know the real world isn't like that. Sorry for interrupting. I know the real world isn't like that. I know if you go out now, I come from the countryside, if I walk out of the door and I go, I don't know, through nature, there's nothing. There's nature and there's nothing to find and there's nothing to discover, no cool secrets, no magicians living in the woods, no Radagast and all of these kind of things. But it's a fantasy game. I want to go explore and find a magical sword in a cave, And
then you have a game who goes completely against it, called Kingdom Come Deliverance, where there's not much between cities, where there's not much between, like, let's say, some farmer's village.
Yeah.
And then the forest, just a forest. It still can be cool in a different sense of immersion, because you're fulfilling on the fantasy of being in this realistic medieval setting. But how do you can't fill that really with gameplay if you are going for this realistic vibe.
But why does Kingdom Come Deliverance work? Because they have, as I said earlier, as I suggested earlier, games should do, they have 10, 20, 30 systems in place that emulate responsiveness, that make the player think they're in a world that actually understands the player's actions, right? In Kingdom Come Deliverance is one of the first games who built so many systems in there. NPCs remembering how you look. And if you don't change your clothes, they will recognize you. NPCs hearing about you, and then if you're still wearing the same things, if you're bloody, if your stuff is dirty, they will act accordingly. If they see you trade with someone and then you trade with them and they heard of that NPC that you ripped them off, they will expect you to rip them off too. And these kind of systems, and then if you kill someone, they get a new recruit, or they replace that with a different villager, and then this villager has to learn these. There's so many systems in place that make this world feel alive, and this is why it works and why it's always interesting and why you don't need the in-between spaces to be super interesting, because everything else is already catching your attention, and it's a realistic setting.
That's a fair point. If you have enough content in the hub areas, let's say, to keep you interested, keep you engaged, keep you immersed, then of course you don't need content everywhere.
No.
So,
but you're proving your own point and mine. Kingdom Come Deliverance exploring is not as interesting and fun as Skyrim's or Witcher's. Actually, it's way less fun, but the game is not about exploring. But it would be nice to have a game that is like, it would be cool if you buy an open world game like that and you don't have to tell yourself, wait, this game isn't about exploring. Don't expect exploring here. I think if you buy a truly open world amazing game, you should be able to do all the things. You should be able to explore and have fun exploring, but you should also be able to have fun emergently interacting with all the living NPCs.
I agree. On the other hand, there's a hugely popular genre. Okay, let's not say hugely, but there's a popular genre with the walking sims. And there are, of course, a lot of players out there who enjoy just strolling around, just seeing like nature or different sceneries. It's the same. Like, I can for sure imagine that there's somebody playing Kingdom Come Deliverance just to stroll around and wander in the woods. So if that activity alone gives satisfaction to the player, then why not? If he doesn't need the content.
But it's not really true what you're saying. A walking simulator isn't about exploring. A walking simulator is about discovering a narrative that is highly linear most of the time and extremely constructed. One of the only walking simulators that people love. I mean, there's like a handful. There's like 5 to 10 walking simulators from the vanishing of Ethan Carter, right? All these. Firewatch, the most popular walking simulator in the world, together with Stanley Parable, maybe. Mm-hmm. It's a super linear story that you always like encounter the same way. Maybe you mm-hmm. encounter block 2C after block 2D, but who cares, right? It's the same story you always encounter. And you don't play this game to walk around in the forest and look at the trees. You play this game because you want to solve that mystery. Your genre exists too, but it's not walking simulators. Games like simulators themselves, like this hunter simulator that you see pop up on Steam, or a landscape photography simulator. These kind of games exist, and these kind of games have player bases, right? People who only play this game to take beautiful pictures or screenshots of landscapes, which is a fair way to play this game. But
there's this phenomena called the Flaneur, flannering, and this is exactly what fosters into the satisfaction of what the walking simulators as well offer. I think there are people who are enjoying just the process of traversing through a space, taking everything in without paying too much attention to the narratives.
Yeah, which is okay.
Like, I think it can be enjoyable enough.
Yes, but this player base, the Flaneurs, are a very, very tiny part of the player base. Of course, there's always going to be someone who is an exception to the rule who will enjoy the game just walking around. But in reality, 95 or 99% of the players are not this kind of player. They don't go around the world just to look at the world. They want to find something there. And suddenly they're not the flaneur anymore. If they walk around and want to find something, then they're the explorer, they're the adventurer.
Okay, yeah. I see where you're going with this argument.
By the way, guys, for everyone who is not in design space or not designing games, what we're talking about is this, what Sven has been saying, flaneur and adventurer and all of these other types. These are actually design personalities or the player personalities that designers use to build their worlds. Like this flaneur is a set term, in the design world. So this is not just some random word Sven is making up, but this is actually...
Yeah, not only in the design world. It's like a hobby that originated, I think, in the late 17th century when like the urban space and the big cities became a thing, and this was exciting enough in its own right that people started walking around in the, like, let's say London becoming this metropolitan city, and that just walking through the city and taking everything in was exciting enough in its own right. So that's like the origin of the flannering.
I don't necessarily agree with the importance that is put to this player base, because I don't know anyone who plays like that. And even statistically, if you analyze statistics of popular games, it's just such a tiny margin.
Yeah, for sure. It's very likely that this fraction of players is very niche. I agree. Even though if you look at games who are sometimes criticized for their gameplay, like The Last of Us, that this offers not enough of gameplay, even though it even offers more gameplay than just... Okay, I'm losing my point here. I was just trying to say...
the main criticism about Last of Us being that it's boring and that there's not enough systems is ridiculous, because Last of Us has a million systems and gameplay systems, and now you want to argue for a game that has no systems where people are just walking around. It's just not something that people enjoy in reality.
Well, that's what I was kind of going for, that I enjoy just going through the spaces and exploring everything without necessarily having to fight zombies. Even if you already cleared the space you were having combat in, I just enjoy looking at the stuff, how everything is constructed, how this world is lived in, and taking everything like that in. I don't need a specific story beat in that moment or a specific gameplay beat to keep me entertained. That's what I meant. And
Yes.
Some people don't like that stuff. They always need some active combat or something to do, or a cutscene to push them forward.
You're arguing your own point in a different way now. You say that after you've cleared the combat space, then you want to explore it. That's something completely different than what a flaneur does.
Because I don't have the opportunity to explore it beforehand, because there are enemies. The game forces me to fight first.
But if the game only offered flaneuring and exploring through without interaction, then you wouldn't play that game. That's the entire point that I'm making, is that there is no player base and no player interested in only doing that. It's only interesting because the world is already interesting to you, because you love the characters, you love the narrative, you love the gameplay, you love all the things that make this game the game. And then you sometimes take some time off to just enjoy the world. And that is normal. That is not a player type. A player type is something that this player only wants to do that. And if we have a player type who is super, super mechanically into mechanical competitive skillness, these kind of players, they play Counter-Strike, they play Spelunky, they play all of these games where there's a lot of skill used. But the flaneur player type, it doesn't really exist, because there's no games, or the games that were made have proven that this player type doesn't exist. Players don't just buy a game to walk around. That's what I'm saying. You're not arguing for the entire type. You're just arguing for that one time you explored this level area, because after you've cleared it everything and you wanted to see how it looks, because now you have time. It's a normal thing.
I would still buy The Last of Us 2 if it didn't have gunplay or didn't have a story, because Seattle as a location, the post-apocalyptic world and the scenery is interesting enough to me to walk around there and take in that space. It's the same reason why I like Assassin's Creed games, is because it takes me to a different time period. I like exploring these time periods, getting immersed in ancient Greek, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt. It's not necessarily gameplay, because I'm not even enjoying the gameplay as much. It's just there. I take it for the fantasy of escaping into a space I haven't been before, something that looks interesting to me. It doesn't always have to be tied to characters or tied to gameplay systems.
Yeah, but now you're talking about the explorer player type and not about the flaneur.
That's fair enough. The flaneur is, if you look at it classically, doesn't set out with a clear goal just for the sake of walking.
He just walks around. He does not interact. He does not have any goal. The only thing he does is walk around and look. He does not take photos. He doesn't do anything. He just walks around and soaks in the experience. And while this is very interesting to do in real life, and I do this all the time in Berlin, because there's always something to see, right? It's always interesting things to pick up on. In most game worlds, that's just not the case. And it's just not as... I can see your point in VR, but I don't see it happen in a normal game world. But I guess you could argue...
But how does the control scheme influence that?
It's not a control scheme. I don't care about I could have a gamepad in my hand in VR. It's about you being immersed in the world, and then suddenly it being as interesting as in the real world, because you are in there and you're observing. But if you look at your little monitor and you walk through Red Dead Redemption's main city, yes, you always have something interesting to see. But if that was the entire game that I had to pay 60 euros for, or bucks for, then I wouldn't buy this game. If the only thing I could do is walk through a city, not being able to interact with anything and just look at people. Yes, it's fun for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or maybe sometimes even an hour, but then it's not fun anymore, you know?
Well, there's this insanely popular YouTube channel who records gameplay of games where you start at one end of the map and just walks towards the other part of the map without interacting in any way with the game. And these videos have a bunch of clicks. Some are even having like 1 million clips. For example, that Skyrim video where you, from the utmost southwest corner of Skyrim, you go to the northeast, for example.
Yeah, but no one is playing those. No one is doing that in gameplay wise. They are watching this YouTube video of someone doing it, so they don't have to because it's boring. They put this on when they're cooking or when they're doing something because they want to be reminded of their favorite game and its scenery. They don't do this. Otherwise, they would start the game and walk for 2 hours through the entire continent. But they aren't.
But just looking at stuff still gives certain degree of satisfaction to the player.
Agreed. 100% agreed. I'm just saying that this is not a player type. This is one of the many systems and tools a game designer of an open world game should use. They should make their world visually appealing for people who have this tendency, who like to go exploring around without interacting, so flaneuring around. But I'm arguing that this is not an entire worth a game trope. This shouldn't be worth a specific genre of games because no one actually enjoys this. Maybe I'm wrong, and now we get a million comments about how they would love a game that is only watching people walk by with no interactions. Then I will have it easily, and with enjoyment, I will take the L and accept that this player type exists in a wider margin. But I doubt it.
Yeah, but maybe I'm also just confusing the flaneur in with something else, because for me, like what I saw in the flaneur, and maybe that was wrong, was also all definitely the explorer type. There's this one term used for the flaneur, it's like the urban explorer. It's like one of the type descriptions of the classical flaneur, also back in the day, introduced by this, what was his name, Walter Benjamin or something? I don't know.
No, this cannot be true. The flaneur is someone observing. So a flaneur does not interact in its classical definition.
No, you're not interacting if you're exploring.
Yes, you are. You're opening doors, you're looking under rocks, you're trying to find passages. A flaneur is not an explorer. A flaneur is walking around and observes and does nothing else. If a door is closed, the flaneur will not go in.
But it's still a type of exploring when you just let yourself go and discover new stuff. It's still exploratory behavior, maybe more passive exploration instead of active exploration.
Yeah, okay. There's maybe a tiny bit of exploration there, but flaneur is mostly a stroller. He's strolling around, and that's all he does.
Yeah, more of a, definitely what we can agree on, that it's a passive thing to do.
Yes, exactly. A very passive
thing to do. It's also a paradox in itself, to do something and it being passive.
That's true. That is true. The official definition is a man who saunters around observing society. That's the official French definition of the word.
And in that way, you are exploring society, taking it in. It's not necessarily a physical exploration.
No, exploring is unveiling things and finding things and looking where you shouldn't be looking and all of this. But a flaneur is just looking around. There's a difference. You're strolling with no purpose and no goal, but an explorer has a purpose. An explorer wants to explore. An explorer wants to actively find things. He wants to, like, what's the definition of the word explorer? I mean, this is...
Let's go for an adventure.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, maybe. I don't know if I'm...
Okay, maybe we can break it down into the explorer would be Bilbo setting out to go somewhere, explore the world, and at the same time, while Frodo is staying back in things and just walking around the Hobbit villages, is more like a flaneuring without any goal.
Yeah, I think they are essentially the same, but one of the two cares for discovering new things, and that's the explorer. The official definition of an explorer is actually, I also checked that, and is someone who explores a new and unfamiliar area. So you wouldn't even be able to be an explorer.
Which could also happen to the flaneur, though.
Yes, it could be, but it isn't mandatory. The flaneur does not care, you know? He would walk the same area and the same marketplace for 200 days in a row, and he wouldn't care. And the explorer can't, because after the first time he has explored this area, it's explored, and now he can't go back. He has to, if he wants to continue being an explorer, he needs new spaces to discover.
But if he continues to find that space interesting, wants to revisit, is there a term for that type of player as well?
No, he's still exploring. If he wants to revisit and want to find something that he has missed before, he's still an explorer. Like if he goes into a cafe and that he hasn't been in.
But just for the sake of being there? Without
no, because
any
that's
intention?
A new thing still. If you go back to something you enjoy, I don't know if that has a design term. This was very interesting. Very academic discussion.
We have to maybe you have to introduce a term for that if there's no term.
But if you're approaching game design in a more academic way, you are often confronted with all of these terms, all of this theory. And yes, it helps. It helps approaching problems. It helps dissecting problems and building specific experiences. But also, nothing replaces practical experience, right? And you can, as we just did, we can throw these words around the Explorer, the Flaneur, we can throw this at each other's faces and just dissect it as much as we want. In the end, it doesn't really matter as long as we understand what makes a playable space fun and playable and worth exploring, right?
But it helps understanding it. It doesn't help designing these spaces in a better way. It just helps to understand your player better if you are accepting of the fact that these types of players exist and what their needs are and wishes and dreams and whatever.
In my eyes, a player has all these personalities in himself, and percentage-wise, he cares for them.
Mm-hmm.
We have some players who have 1% Flaneur, who just walk around sometimes, just for 5 minutes, just letting this atmosphere sink in, and then they continue on. And we have players who care 90% about exploring and don't even want to touch combat. But in the end, it still matters to know that everyone has a little bit of this Flaneur, everyone has a little bit of this explorer in themselves. So when you design these spaces, you need to account for that there will be people who care about finding secrets in Skyrim's world. But there will also be people who only care about tight mage combat, with good feedback, and they just want to slaughter things and feel powerful. But sometimes they might want to explore a cave and find something cool. So you gotta keep that in balance.
That's the beauty of Sandbox.
Yeah, beauty and danger of Sandbox.
Beauty and danger for sure. Offering the different player possibilities and options. And infinitely increasing your workload and scope.
Exactly. With every system you add, with every layer of interactivity. Oh my God. It's crazy what some AAA developers are able to, or for some bigger studios are able to put on like interactivity wise. If you look at Kingdom Come Deliverance, a comparably small studio compared to studios like the one behind Witcher, what they have been able to achieve in terms of AI and interactivity and live, like how alive the world feels, it's amazing. I just wish game code would be, or game work would be treated as open source, which of course it can't, it's companies. But imagine a company like Kingdom Come coming up with insane AI, and from that point onward, when they release the game, every company can use that AI system. So
that would facilitate it's so much more. Every game becoming bigger.
That would be amazing, because after 10 years of this, we would have Half-Life Alyx releasing Half-Life Alyx, and we have the best fucking glove and VR interactivity, physics-based VR hand interactivity. And then we have Assassin's Creed verticality, and we have the story and narrative bits and how the systems work with the quest systems of Witcher. And all of these things coming together for all developers to be used as they please would be, of course, an utopia. Would be very cool for the consumer.
And it's insane how many people work on these big titles nowadays. Yeah. There was this one article recently on, not sure if it was Kotaku or Bloomberg, but there were 2,000 people on Last of Us Part 2. And at Naughty Dog, there are only like 300 people maybe at the studio. Like additionally 1,700 outsourced people around the world.
We have, but you have to be careful with these numbers. They're heavily inflated. There were a lot of developers from these studios and execs as well commenting that these numbers aren't true. Yes, there's a lot of people working on it, but this number doesn't factor in if the person who worked on it is a developer. So some of these numbers are cleaning staff. Some of these numbers are people who made one asset and that's it. And then they, I don't know, freelance one asset. These are all these
Still
people.
Contributed.
Everyone who contributed. It's awesome that 2,000 people contributed, but don't think there's 2,000 people working in full time on this title.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Just
I know, but I want to clarify this, because a lot of people were very angry under the Twitter post of that article because the numbers are so heavily inflated.
Or gives a wrong picture of things.
Because we will already get enough hate mail now for people
for the Flaneur discussion.
angry at me for denying the Flaneurs of this world their game experiences. But yeah, okay. This is a cool episode. I enjoyed this more academic discussion of things.
Didn't even think of it too much as an academic discussion. Just, I don't know, was enjoying regardless.
Yeah, enjoying regardless. All right, guys, thank you. Thank you as always for making us part of your weekly routine. There will be a few more guests coming soon in the future. Other than that, socials?
Sure. Always ready the socials. If you want to follow us on Twitter to keep up to date with all the episodes, you can, of course, do that at Idiots Industry and turn that around for Instagram at Industry Idiots. And you can also find, of course, the direct links in the episode descriptions of your favorite podcast app, as you already know, probably. And yeah, if you want to keep up to date with all the new episodes or anything else that happens around the podcast, updates from Sam or me, and anything cool happening, then follow us there.
Yes. Awesome. If you have any wishes or feedback or questions for future guests or topics that you would like to hear explored by us, with or without someone from indie or AAA, let us know as well. And other than that, bye.
Bye.